Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Real Kindness Games. Pew, 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 pew. As you all know, the Real Kindness Games shed light on our personal biases and encourages kindness by modeling curiosity and conversation. It's so that we can appreciate another human for their unique perspective and experiences to heal our communities together. As humans, we have far more in common than what divides us, as long as we're okay with it. Today, we have a guest, Angela. I should have asked you how to say your last name. Scal- I'll let you say it. Uh,
Scalpello.
Thank you. Please tell the audience about a little bit about yourself and your background and just, what your thoughts on the Real Kindness Games are.
Okay, so first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you for having me. I spent most of my life in corporate America as the chief human resources officer, chief of staff for some, number of public companies. And then I started my own consulting practice because I realized that what I love the best is helping individuals, teams, and organizations be better than they even know they can be. And one of the things that I use in my tool from my toolkit is something called conversational intelligence, helping people understand that healthy conversations, right, create relationships, healthy relationships, which in turn create healthy cultures where people feel that they can be their authentic self and can innovate without fear of judgment and with their psychological safety.
Awesome. And for those of you diehard Getting Security Done fans, you'll recognize her from, I think, episode 3
Right, I
of
think
GSD
so.
Fails. So, one of the amazing things that come out of 2020 is Angela and I meeting on that episode of GSD Fails for the very first time. And we've kept in contact ever since. She's a recent The Kindness Games competitor, which has been awesome, bringing some respectability to our little initiative. And so thanks for coming on. This is awesome. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So in our last episode, we talked about let's solve the problem that is now transferred into 2021. And so Kekishan and I laid out all of the different aspects that are fairly universal for this problem of intuitive conflict, I think we're going to call it, right? Because we're being conditioned to be in conflict. That is a fact. So how do we get past that? And one of the first things we talked about is I think we have forgotten how to have enjoyable conversation, how to enjoy each other's presence, because we've been secluded, we've been work from home and COVIDed it away, and we haven't had any interactions outside of the people that live with us in our home, which has degraded our ability to be generous and gracious and hospitable. So Angela, do you want to start us off just by talking about like how do we enjoy each other and how do we go about having an enjoyable conversation?
So I think that one of the most important things that makes a conversation, that makes a relationship, is listening to each other, right? How many times have you found yourself or observed people who are talking over each other? And, we think that listening is a soft skill, and yet I will tell you that it's probably one of the hardest things to learn and to do well because we all believe we listen, but we don't listen to connect. We listen to judge. Why did he say that? We listen to criticize. That was a stupid comment, right? Or we listen to give our own point of view. Like, Tim, please stop talking because now I want to tell you why you're wrong or why I believe differently. Or the other thing we do is we listen to self refer, right? So you say, oh my gosh, I've been feeling so stressed out. Instead of saying, tell me more about that. Stressed out in what way? I say, oh, if you think you're stressed out, wait till you hear my story, right? And when you listen deeply to someone, you connect, right? Listening opens up somebody, right? If Tim was to say to me, I'm really confused, and I said to him, don't be confused, or what are you so confused about, right? Like it shuts him down. If I say to him, tell me more about that. Confused, Tim, in what way? Right? Now he feels that I care because that's the type of question somebody who cares, right? And in having that kind of conversation, people they feel seen, right? And if you don't feel seen, how do you have a conversation with someone? And as Tim knows, I'm a conversational IQ coach. There are 3 levels of conversation. The first level is ask, tell, right? So what time is dinner? What time are we doing this podcast? What are our KPIs for this quarter? Right? That's not a judgment of level 1 conversations, right? But they don't create connection. A level 2 is when I say, okay, well, I'll make this up, I'm for the flat tax. And Tim's like, well, I don't agree with that. So we have a conversation. And my goal in that conversation is to convince Tim that he is wrong and that I am right.
And so
Right?
that's where we spent 2020
Yes.
with a club.
Right.
Yep.
So you're wrong and I'm right. And so what we often say in conversational IQ is first we tell, then we sell, right? Because I'm trying to convince him. I've got a better argument. I'm going to question him, right? And then we yell, which means then we get aggressive, right? And you know that when we get aggressive, the other person feels attacked. And when the other person feels attacked, they have what's known as an amygdala hijack, right? Which is their primitive brain triggers. They feel like they're not safe, right? And isn't that what happens when you get attacked? That was a stupid thing to say. Why would you do that, right? I don't want to hear from you anymore, right? That's just BS, right? And how does that open up the space to have a conversation where you say, okay, well, help me understand that? Because as Tim knows, because we've worked together, right? Understanding is literally standing in the other person's perspective of reality, right? So I always use this example. If I hold this bottle of water up, and maybe they'll sponsor your podcast, right? You see this part of the bottle. The people behind me, Ducky, my friend Ducky, my coworker Ducky, sees this, right? And we believe that we enter life, a conversation or a relationship with the same perspective on things. And that's not possible, right? And it's not that they have to divide us, but they distinguish us, right? Tim's way of living in the world as a man is different than ours, because we live in a different gender, right? And we all bring part of our story. And unless you can show respect to somebody else's story, you can't have a pleasant conversation.
That's so true. And I will throw out one other thing, right? So you mentioned that when we are attacked, when we're confronted, when somebody's really trying to push their ideas on us, we kind of lose control of our mind, right? And we go into that defensive fight or flight mode. I'll submit, just for me, I know nobody else out there has this, but that also happens for me when I begin to feel insecure. Like I don't feel like I totally understand the conversation. I know somebody's trying to have a conversation with me, but I feel like I'm going to sound dumb or uneducated. And then I put up defense mechanisms. And we've advocated since last year when we started this that we should, instead of going to defense, we should lead with curiosity. It's great that we actually don't understand, or this is not our our game, right? This is not where we're comfortable. Help me understand. I'd love to learn. Do you see that as a viable option for kind of bringing it down for yourself, self-regulation?
So, first of all, you mentioned a word that I'm madly in love with and a way of being that I'm madly in love with, and that's curiosity, right? That's curiosity. Like, why did that happen? And how did you get involved in this field? And, tell me how you formed that opinion. But that's said without judgment, right?
Right.
Think of the difference, right? How'd you come up with that idea? Versus, help me understand that. That's interesting. I haven't looked at it that way, right? Someone once said, I can't remember who, I never learned anything from people I agreed with, right? And it's not that you have to necessarily be convinced of somebody else's position. You have to be open to, again, stepping into their perspective. Like, that's so interesting. I never thought about it that way. My son and I have a podcast, and we always prep for the podcast. And I often have a point of view about something we'll be talking about. And he'll say, and he's a grown man, Mom, I don't know if I see it that way because, and I find that fascinating because it makes me look at things differently, right? And when you're curious about your own reaction to things, why did that trigger me? Why
Mm.
did that upset me? Why did I feel insecure in that meeting? Confucius, who we've heard of, says that you gain wisdom three ways, right? Reflection is the noblest, right? Imitation is the easiest, and experience is the bitterest. But
Mm.
if you can reflect on what you've heard, reflect on that. I mean, I don't want to get political, but I've been looking at all the things that have been happening in the world, thinking, okay, what were people thinking? What did they hope to accomplish? What should the consequences be? How do we move forward? Right? It's being open to lots of input, right? So that you can, it's like a compost, right? You don't get the richness unless you get things to sort of stir up inside you and to have the time to look at them, right, without judgment or criticism.
I love what you said about self curiosity and Kekishan. I don't know now that I think how many times last year when I was trying to do my best, because hey, guess what? Those of you who know me know I'm basically perfect. But the other people that don't know me, every now and again, I am insecure, right? And also, I'm not as good at having these types of conversations as I look like on LinkedIn. So, throwing that out there. But how many times would it have benefited me? And I'm wondering what you think about this, Kekishan, if I would have asked myself out loud during a conversation, wow, that really made me angry. Why am I so angry right now? Like, I'm sorry. I would love to take a step back, but like, I have to figure this mess out. Like, why would that offend me? Like, can you help me understand? That would probably be an interesting conversational pivot that would help the other person understand, like, ooh, Tim's in a weird spot right now, but I'm not trying to hide it or be defensive, but I have to be vulnerable.
Hmm.
Yeah, honestly, I think open conversations really do begin with the questioning of everything, right? Like when you come into a conversation, and the one conversation we had with Dr. Rob McKenna, he basically came in and said, ask yourself, what is my purpose in this conversation? Or what is my purpose here? Why am I here today? I think that it kind of goes hand in hand, right? One, you have to say, this is my purpose for this conversation, or this is my purpose in life right now, as well as this may be my purpose, but maybe my purpose could be so much more. What is that person's purpose? What is that person's perception? I think one thing we always forget is to think about the other person. We always think about, well, this is my point of view, this is my opinion. But we always forget, well, this person has this perception and this opinion because of their experiences. And I love the conversation of curiosity. Tim, you and I have talked about it so many times. And Angela, I'm so glad that this is your favorite word, because without curiosity, I don't think we'd ever be able to have a conversation that was very much enjoyable. So I think coming in to actually in a conversation, take a step back and recognize, oh my God, I had a visceral reaction to something that you just said. Why did I have that reaction? If you're in a conversation with someone you trust deeply, have coming out and saying, that comment really made me uncomfortable. Like it actually gave me this physical reaction of discomfort. Let's go into this together and have a discussion about why it made me or it made you uncomfortable, and think about what we can learn together, instead of saying, wow, I can't believe you said that. I can't have this conversation anymore. Because I fear that's what's happening in our world right now, where if you come into a conversation with differing opinions, you end up just leaving both saying, you know what, I'm out. I don't want to talk to you anymore, or let's take a break. I just can't have this conversation. I think that's where we do ourselves disservice, because we're losing that moment to learn from each other.
Right, exactly. And you know what? You just, both of you referred to what I call the gateway emotional intelligence, which is self awareness, right? If you can't be aware of your own feelings, how can you be empathetic and understand other people's feelings if you're not connected with your own? And being connected with your own, like Tim says, like you say, Kekishan, it's about saying, wow, I don't know why, but something that you just said unsettled me. Can we talk about it? Right? And then the other person, if they're curious, would say, okay, well, let's deconstruct what I said. What was it about it? Right? Because so many times in a conversation or in life or in teams, it's, intention versus impact.
Yeah.
Right? It's like I didn't intend to upset you, so help me understand, what did I say exactly?
And that's a key point, right? Because often pleasant conversation turns because I felt away, right? But when I was talking to Angela about that, I was really passionate about the topic I was talking about. I had no idea that I caused her to feel that way. And if she told me, oh my gosh, what you said really made me uncomfortable, like, give me a second to breathe, but I don't know why. Like, I want to understand me. I'm going to say, like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. Let's not talk about it. And if Angela's like, no, I want to understand. But can we just kind of break it down to like what we were talking about so that we can understand what I'm uncomfortable with and maybe we can explore why? I think that in itself brings the temperature on both sides down and invites the other person into a conversation, a deeper conversation about something they're probably already passionate about.
Yeah, and I think this also brings us back to that episode we had on insult and offense, right? Like people get insulted so easily and take offense to things that may not be intentional. We may not have intentionally said a word that drove you off the deep end. So when you're offended or insulted by someone, you have to come out and say, I was offended or I was insulted. This is why, and this is how you can fix it, or this is how we can fix it together. Because I think when you tell someone you're insulted and you walk out of the room, that is completely unconstructive, right? You're not, there's no solution at all. So I think you have to come up with some sort of, hey, this is what we can do together to come out the end, it's still unscathed with our relationship intact. What do you
Right,
think, Angela?
exactly. Totally. The other piece too is that you can never get in trouble use feeling words. Okay. So if we're in a meeting and I'm saying something and you either are talking over me or I'm feeling as if my words are going nowhere. If I say to you, Kikishan, you're not listening to me. Even if I say it in a nice way, Kikishan, you're not listening to me. Right? What do we set up? Yes, I am. No, you're not. Yes, I am. No, you're not. Right? If I say to you, you know what, I don't feel listened to in this conversation, that's a very different dynamic. You can't tell me what I feel. Yes, you do feel listened to. In that moment, you have to step back and own okay, what part you're playing in making me feel not listened to. Right? So if I was to say that to you, right, the response could be, okay, I'm sorry. Tell me what it is that you're trying to say that I'm not hearing somehow. Right? So anytime you set up a conversation where you can get into it, yes, I am, no, you're not, yes, I am, no, you're not. Right? And I think the other piece too is to make sure we're using words exactly. Right?
Mm.
Like if I say to someone, we need to be much more transparent on this team. Right? Well, what does transparency look like? If this team was more transparent with each other, what would we do differently? If we could be transparent, right, what would we do? What would be the one or two things we would do differently? Right? A lot of times, same language, same word, totally different meaning.
So important because one of the byproducts of 2020 and our COVID adventure is the lack of defining terms. What am I talking about versus what you're talking about? Are you actually understanding my intention or are you taking it another way? And things have become so ambiguous. And I think some of it maybe just learned from bad communication while we're separated and frustration overall. But I think we do have to be precise with our language, and we should ask for feedback. Hey, this is, I tell you my thought. This is how I intended you to receive it. Did I hit the mark? Have you received it that way? If not, I'd love to know why.
Right. The scariest question I always tell managers they can ask after they've had a performance conversation or a conversation where they've had to say something, right? Like, hey, Kekashan, I know that your intention for this project was A, B, and C, and somehow we fell short. And I'm wondering how you feel about it. Maybe you give me some reasons. And I say to you, well, I think part of it was that, early in the project, it might have been helpful if you had told me your hesitation about these goals.
Yeah.
And then I have to stop and say, how do you feel about what I just told you? Because you want to
Yeah.
know then and there. Like you might say, I feel unappreciated. Okay, so tell me more about that, right? Because I know we've talked about aggressiveness, but there's another option, and that's silent or violent, right? And by that I mean aggressive, right? Just swallowing things and saying, that's not good either. Like if you're in a relationship, that as long as you're arguing, you still have a relationship. The minute your significant other says, you know what, I'm so done, why even
Yep.
bother,
Yeah.
right?
And I think having these conversations also builds relationship, right? Like when you have that conversation with your management, even if it's a conversation that feels uncomfortable and you're both kind of butting heads a little, but you're having a very difficult conversation, you're going to build trust. You're going to build a relationship that's more than just manager and subordinate. It's like you're actually becoming colleagues. You're becoming part of a community. You spend so much time at work. You spend so much time in your industries. They're kind of like your second family. So why not treat them the same way that you would a family member? If your brother or cousin comes and says, hey, I don't like this, like you're going to have a really real conversation with them, right? Like, hey, I didn't like the way that you did that, or I didn't like the way that you talked to me. Why not give that same courtesy to your colleagues or your folks in your network, right?
Right, exactly. And we know that relationship before task. The people that we have the best conversations with, the most authentic and honest, are people that we trust. And you have to know people to trust them, right? If I said to both of you, think in your mind someone you really, really trust, you're not going to say, oh, it's like that person I noticed at the stop sign the other day, right? It's like somebody who you really know, their values, right? You know what's important to them. You know their aspirations. You know them, right? They know you. So you can be, as Tim said, vulnerable, right? And vulnerability is a great strength.
It is, even when it doesn't feel like it uh, at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, so, hey, we've had really good talk about how to self-regulate during conversations, which I think is probably 85% of the battle. But what happens, Angela, when we're in a conversation and the other person begins to escalate? Maybe we don't feel threatened or offended, but somehow they got offended or they strongly disagreed, and they're going to let you know why.
hmm Okay, so there's a number of things you can do. The first one, as you say, is to make sure you center yourself, right? And that you don't react, right? So
Your
that
woosah moment.
yes, right? The other way is there's a couple of things you can do. You can use your tone and you can use your words, right? So I would say something, you seem really upset, Tim, right? Or you seem really angry, right? And I also would use, as Chris Voss, the negotiator, says, I would use my late night FM voice. Tim, you seem really upset. Or Tim, you seem really angry. And then I get quiet, right? My experience is that people usually wind down, right? It's very hard to stay at that high pitched level. So, Tim, you seem really upset. Or, you know what? This conversation, you can also neutralize it. This conversation is getting really heated, and I don't know that it's going to get us to where we want to go. So, why don't we step back and let's talk about where do we want this conversation to go? What does a successful conversation look like in this moment right now? Right? Have I said something to upset you, Tim? Well, you refuse to listen to me. Okay, so what is it that you think I haven't heard? Right? And I apologize if that's the impression you're getting.
And it's hard to stop talking. I mean, I talk all the time. That's all I do.
No, I think I love that you said to use like your late night FM tone, because I I think a lot of times people get escalated because you get excited as well. Like they get excited. They're like, "Oh my God, I'm so mad at you." And you're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you did this and you did that." And like you just keep escalating it more and more. And if you recognize that the situation is getting super escalated, like from a conflict resolution perspective, it's always like good to take a step back, right? Like
Right.
you recognize in the moment, oh my God, okay, this cannot go in a positive direction. Where else can I take it? Take a step back and take a breath. I've always like I've told multiple people, like when I get really anxious or really really upset, I feel it in my fingers, like just like the tips of my fingers. And anytime I have like this really physical reaction, I have to be like, okay, center myself. Why am I feeling this way? Why is the other person feeling this way? And I get really upset when someone starts yelling at me or gets like really excited. So that is actually a really good tip I'm going to take with me. I'm going to use Tim's NPR voice. Like,
Right. Well, the other thing too, don't forget, Tim and I have talked about this also, which is your emotions are contagious.
Yep.
How many times have you been in a situation where you know the other person is anxious and you start getting anxious yourself, right? Or how many times have, you been anxious and you can see that you're making other people anxious, right? Our emotions are contagious. We have mirror neurons that are working when we're having a conversation, and the way I'm conducting myself is going to impact you, right? It's why when a parent is, rocking a baby, right, you can actually gauge or measure that their heartbeats are becoming in sync. So it's really important that, as we said, we put ourselves in a calmer state. We use a voice that isn't filled with anger or anxiety. And we're open to the possibility of questions, right?
Yep.
Tell me more. What are you feeling? What do you think triggered that? What is it that you think I'm not hearing? Right? What could we do differently? What kind of conversation do we want to have, and what do we have to do differently to get there?
Also, personally speaking, this point right here to where somebody else has been amped up and it's starting to reflect on me is a great time to say, do you need a glass of water or a soda? Like, I need one. And I don't want the conversation to go in this direction. And I'm afraid that I'm causing it. So let me take a break. Do you need anything? Let me come back. Let everything come down and say, I want to understand your perspective, because the way the conversation was headed made me start to feel offended. And I don't feel like I should be offended by you. Like, I don't want that for me. And that means I'm misunderstanding you, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's like, I need to sometimes get away. And when we trap people in these situations and expect a conversation to get better, like, what? Does that make sense?
Right.
yeah.
I think the other thing too is, so let me talk a little bit about the glass of water, because it's an old HR tip, right? So you lay somebody off or you have to fire them or whatever, and they start to cry, you offer them a glass of water, because you cannot drink water and continue to cry. So if you're trying to make somebody stop crying, you have them drink a glass of water, because you can't do both at the same time, right? The other is that, when you express yourself honestly, right? Like, I know this is not the conversation that we want to have. What's the conversation we do want to have? Again, it's being open to a different possibility. And that's a sign of respect also. What is it that you want out of this, Keikashan? Right? What's important to you in this conversation? Right? It's a sign of respect. It's a gift. Being listened to is such a gift.
I love that. I think in this conversation, I heard so many great nuggets. One is, active listening is not a soft skill. It is really hard to do, and we all have to learn to do it. Curiosity is a way to live by. Like, if you're not curious about a conversation, in a conversation, you're not going to have a pleasant conversation. So question your intent, question your purpose. I'm never going to get over this one. Offer someone who's about to cry a glass of water because they cannot do both things at once. Like, I'm going to take that to my grave. Thank you.
Right. The other thing too is, I did a session yesterday, and this was part of it, and that is reflection. right? I can't remember his name now, but he started this huge healthcare company. And he said that he started a practice years ago, which is at the end of the day, he just spent 15 minutes and would ask himself a question like, if I had the day to do over, what would I choose to do differently?
Mm.
Right?
Wow.
Ray Dalio, who started Bridgewater, right, the world's largest hedge fund, said that the business was built based on his own reflections of, things that were painful to him, right? If you can't look at it and examine it and be curious yourself about what you've done, what you could do differently, right? It's really important, and
Yeah.
it's important to you as an individual, as a person in a relationship. It's really important as a leader.
I love that.
I love that.
I think it's time for my NPR moment. Can I do it?
NPR is out. NPR is out.
In a world where we are misunderstanding each other on a daily basis, it's really important to remember that as humans, we're not perfect. And really, we're only slightly perfectible. And so we often forget that we need to make room for the things that annoy us, or the things that make us uncomfortable, or faults that somebody else has. And we should do so in the hope that they'll extend a little grace for our faults as well. And the common condition of humanity is complacency. And we see this with every intimate relationship you develop, right? There's that phase of you meet somebody and it's really exciting. You open up, you create that relationship, you allow vulnerability, and then you get comfortable. And then as you get comfortable, disagreements happen. Things are said, things are done that hurt you a little bit, and you start to close up that vulnerability instead of leaning into how we can proceed forward. And then we take each other for granted. We become completely complacent that this relationship will always be the one we once had. And that's how we fail over and over and over again. As humans, our love grows cold for one another. And that's what's been happening. So be curious. Ask yourself why you're feeling the way you are feeling right now in this conversation. And partner with somebody to design a better conversation, a better path forward. If not for yourself, for your sphere of influence and for your community around you. And that's what we need these days.
Tim, your NPR moments are
Yep.
always just gold.
Yep. Perfect. Thank
Well,
you.
folks, there you have it. Angela, thank you so much for coming on to our show and sharing your incredible insights. I learned so much. I will always offer a glass to someone who is crying, can't do it while you're crying, or can't drink water while you're crying. Anyways, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Thank
and have a
you.
great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.